All right, let's get it going here. First question talks about vertical asymptotes. And when we're talking about vertical asymptotes, we are definitely dealing with the idea of when what values cannot equal 0 here. Because when you have a 0 in the denominator, anything divided by 0 is undefined, so we can't have that. So what we're going to do is we quickly factor the denominator, and we come up with this as its two factors. And so the two values that would create vertical asymptotes are -2 and -3. So the idea of vertical asymptotes is the denominator can never equal 0. And if those two numbers went in, it would equal 0. Simplified form means to reduce it as much as you can, and usually, well, always, that means factoring. So you'll notice x squared minus 1 can be factored as x plus 1 and x minus 1. And then we have our division on the bottom, and everything actually is already set up in terms of addition, subtraction there. And now, because things are all multiplying and dividing except those in the brackets, they can be canceled completely as needed. So here, divide 25 by 5 leaves us with a 5. Here we can divide out the x and one of the x's in the bottom. And what's left with is a 5 on the top, an x minus 1 on the top, and then it looks like just an x on the bottom. Now some students think that they can divide this by this, but that you can't. That top guy there is definitely connected into a world with that -1. So you cannot cancel this. This would be the final answer. To answer this one, we do a similar thing. Again, simplifying typically just means factoring and then reducing out common items. So again, x minus 1, x plus 1. I notice I can take a 5 out of the other one, which just gives me 5x minus 1. All of that is on the top. Down on the bottom I get 5x minus 1 and x plus 1. Those were already all factored. Now, the reason I've kind of put them like all together here on the bottom and the top is because we're multiplying. When you multiply fractions, you multiply everything in the numerator and denominator. And now we can begin to simplify. So these cancel, divide out, these divide out. And again, we're left with something that looks like this. There's a group of you that are interested in going further and saying, what about taking an x out of here and here? And again, you cannot do that. This 5x minus 1 is a connected item. This would be your final answer. In this case, you'll notice that the denominators are all different. Normally, your thought would be to make a common denominator. What we're actually going to do is find a common denominator, which would be 8x squared. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply it by all of the terms. And that's an okay thing to do. You're allowed to multiply through the entire equation. Now the reason we do that is because it simplifies things. Those divide out, leaving us with 36. Now here, the x here, the x squared, and the x divide out, leaving us with 8x times 4, which is 32x. And then here, we divide out the 8's, we divide out an x, and what's left is x times 5 for 5x. And now this is actually all you have to solve to get to your answer, which isn't that bad. We got 36 here, and what do we get? -27x looks like. And we divide both sides by -27. And so x equals 36 over -27. 9 goes into both of those, so that would be -4/3 would be our final answer there. So it's much easier if you multiply through by a common value. It simplifies it to be a nice little equation that way. In this case, the parent function is 1 over x. And looks in a very simple form like this. So if we have 1 over x minus 3, we know that that means right 3. And if we have the -2 here, that means down 2. So we need to look for the graph that went to the right 3 and down 2, which happens to be this guy, right? because we are at 3 and negative 2 is kind of that centering point. That's what's going on. Start with the premise that volume equals base times height. They tell us that the volume is 5x plus 15 all over x squared minus 4. And that's going to equal x plus 3, x minus 2 times something else. So we got to figure out what that something else is. Now one of the tricks we can pull here is if we factor this, you'll see we might recognize this a little easier. Now notice that this guy is already sitting here, so that means we need an x plus 2 down here. And also notice that the x plus 3 is here, so we need a 5 there. This would be our height. That would be the height that we would be multiplying by to find our answer. So base, here's our base, times our height equals our volume. The key was to factor that. Remember that. You'll see that one again, promise. It's kind of a funny question to ask, which one has the most restrictions? This one here has one restriction. X cannot equal 1. This also has one restriction. X cannot equal negative 1. This one actually, the two, when you factor this, you get, let's see, what would it be? It would be x plus 3 and x minus 1. And so x cannot equal negative 3, and x can also not equal 1. It has two restrictions. This one here actually has no restrictions because it will always be positive no matter what. So C is the answer because it has two restrictions, the most restrictions. And that's because you can never divide by 0.